I have a storage unit in downtown. I've rented it for 12 years, and I never once told my daughter, Emma, about it. Anyone who hears that immediately assumes the worst, that I was hiding money, valuables, some dirty secret. But that wasn't it. I was hiding it to protect something. Then Emma married Tyler Grant. From the very first day he stepped into my house, Tyler looked at everything like he was calculating its price. He smiled politely, but his eyes were cold. You could almost see the numbers running through his head, how much the house was worth, what I might leave behind, what insurance I had. And every time the topic of the storage unit came up, Tyler would give the same dismissive line. Rick, just clear that junk out already? Why keep it around? He thought it was trash. He thought I was just an old man he could easily manipulate. But Tyler didn't know one thing. That storage unit was the very thing that would expose him and save my daughter from a gold-digging marriage. I'm telling this story so you'll wake up. Not so you can just sit there, nod along, and forget it 5 minutes later. A few names and minor details might be changed to protect the real people involved, but the truth itself hasn't been touched. A gold digger always wears the mask of a decent person. And the biggest fool in the room is the one who willingly closes their eyes just to keep the peace. If you're still watching at this point, leave a comment telling me where you're from, so I know how many people out there have run into someone like Tyler. Then keep listening, because that junk storage he looks down on will be the very place that exposes him the fastest. My name is Richard Rick Bennett. I'm 64 years old and I live in Los Angeles. 12 years ago, my wife, Evelyn, passed away. From that day on, I learned a painful truth. A man can collapse after losing the person he loves, but a father doesn't get that luxury because he still has a child depending on him. My daughter is Emma Bennett, 31 years old. She's smart, kind-hearted, but she has one fatal weakness. She trusts people too quickly. And men like Tyler Grant thrive on exactly that kind of person. 3 years ago, Emma brought Tyler home to meet me. He spoke politely, dressed neatly, throwing around sir and ma'am like he'd been raised perfectly. But the way he looked around the house told me everything. That wasn't the look of a man hoping to become part of the family. It was the look of someone quietly estimating the value of the assets. From that day on, I didn't confront him. I didn't start a fight. I simply tightened my grip on one thing: control over what Emma didn't know, especially that storage unit downtown, because I understood something about Tyler. To him, love was just an excuse. The real target was money. Emma's wedding looked beautiful from the outside, like something straight out of a movie: white dress, flowers, vows, applause. Everyone kept telling me how lucky I was to have a son-in-law like Tyler Grant. A decent guy, they said, ambitious. But I stood in the corner of the room and watched Tyler when he thought no one was paying attention. He didn't look at Emma the way a man looks at the love of his life on his wedding day. He looked at her like a deal that had just been finalized. The kind of possessive look, his arm around her waist, smiling for the crowd, but his eyes kept moving, scanning the guests, scanning me, scanning the house, like he was checking where the assets were. When I congratulated him, Tyler shook my hand firmly and said the exact line that's supposed to sound decent: "I'll take care of Emma like a princess." But his voice was cold. And I've learned something over the years: men who say that line the loudest usually don't take care of anyone. They take care of ownership. From that day on, I started paying closer attention to Tyler. My instincts were clear. This guy wasn't here because of Emma. He was here because of what Emma represented. That storage unit downtown wasn't the pile of junk Tyler liked to sneer about. I rented it the day Evelyn died, 12 years ago. And I've kept the key ever since, like it's the family's emergency valve, the one thing that could still control the pressure if everything else went wrong. Inside, there's no random junk. It's my safe, just not the kind that sits in a bank. Inside are all the property documents Evelyn left behind: insurance records, wills, and other critical legal contracts. papers tied to the trust set up to protect Emma, especially if anything ever happens to me, and copies of documents that would be enough to make any greedy man choke if he tried to reach for them. I never told Emma about it because Emma has a soft heart. And Tyler? Tyler doesn't have a soft heart. He only softens when he sees money. To put it plainly, that storage unit was the last layer of armor, and the moment Tyler dismissed it, he stepped exactly where I wanted him, into a place filled with paperwork, legal boundaries, and traps waiting for a gold digger. I deliberately didn't tell Emma about the storage unit. Not because I don't trust my daughter, but because I know her weakness. A soft heart. If Emma knew, she'd mention it to her husband out of habit, because in her mind, spouses shouldn't keep secrets from each other. But with a guy like Tyler, the moment he hears the word storage unit, how much is it worth? And how do I get my hands on it? I couldn't just come out and say, Tyler's a gold digger, right from the start. Saying it too early would have backfired. Emma would have thought I was being judgmental, controlling, trying to sabotage her happiness. And Tyler would have used that exact reaction to drive a wedge between us, slowly isolating Emma from me. So I chose the harder path, but the surer one. Stay quiet and prepare. I kept the key. I kept the documents. I kept control. And I waited for the day Tyler would expose himself. Because in this life, some battles aren't won by shouting, they're won with paperwork and evidence. During the first 2 years after the wedding, I didn't do anything dramatic. I simply watched. And the longer I watched, the clearer it became. Tyler Grant wasn't interested in family the way normal people are. He was interested in cash flow. He started with questions that sounded harmless on the surface. Rick, when are you planning to retire? This house must have gone up in value, huh? Does Emma have her name on any of the property? Your insurance. I'm guessing that's pretty solid, right? It sounded like small talk, but in reality, he was appraising assets, layer by layer. At the same time, Tyler started doing something dirtier, pulling Emma away from me. He created this whole busy life routine, and new house rules weekends were for just the two of them, fewer visits to see me, shorter phone calls, and every time Emma mentioned coming by, he'd sigh like the victim and say something like, I didn't need any special powers to see what was happening. Just experience. Anyone who wants to control my daughter will first try to isolate her from me. Right when I was quietly collecting Tyler's behavior piece by piece, like gathering shards of broken glass, Mike Carter called me. Mike has been my closest friend for more than 33 years, and he's not the kind of man who calls in a panic over nothing. Mike's voice was low and tight. Rick, I overheard Tyler having a conversation, and I don't like it one bit. I asked, what did he say? Mike paused for a second, then said it straight. He was asking about your life insurance. Not the kind of question someone asks out of concern, the kind that sounds like he's doing the math. And he even said something like, if the old man disappeared, things would be a lot easier. I gripped the phone harder. My heart didn't start racing. It started pounding, heavy, because at that point, Tyler was no longer just some vaguely greedy guy. He had started to smell a target. Mike ended the call with one last line. Don't let your daughter be alone around him. And don't treat this like a gut feeling anymore. This is a warning. In that moment, I knew the game had just moved to another level. I had to act, but with evidence, not anger. That night, after Mike's call, I sat alone in the living room and opened Evelyn's old box again. Inside was a letter she had written before she died. It wasn't long, but every word felt like it had been nailed straight into my mind. Rick, if the day ever comes when you have to protect Emma, don't try to protect her with words. Words can be twisted too easily. Protect her with documents, with the law, with things no one can argue against. And remember, there will be people who use love as a disguise to turn our daughter into prey. When I finished reading it, my throat tightened, because Tyler was doing exactly what Evelyn had warned about, wearing the mask of a decent man, speaking sweetly, while slowly tightening his grip on Emma's life. I folded the letter and slipped it into my jacket pocket like I was carrying a promise. From that moment on, I stopped wondering if maybe I was just being paranoid. The only thing on my mind was this. I had to do exactly what Evelyn had told me: prepare the documents, prepare the trap, and protect Emma in the most certain way possible. I still remember very clearly the first time Tyler Grant walked into my house. He brought a respectable bottle of wine, smiled just enough, shook my hand just enough, everything perfectly rehearsed, like a man trying to make the best impression. But what bothered me wasn't what he said. It was the questions. Less than 20 minutes after sitting down, Tyler had already steered the conversation like a real estate agent doing an appraisal. This neighborhood must have gone up a lot in value. Right, Rick? Are you thinking of selling the house someday or leaving it to Emma? Do you invest in anything? Stocks? Real estate? Your insurance? I'm guessing that's in good shape? He asked everything so casually, so naturally, but every question landed like a knife, cutting straight into the same place. Assets. Emma sat beside him, even smiling, thinking her husband was just being responsible and planning for the future. But I looked straight into Tyler's eyes and understood one thing immediately. This man wasn't trying to understand my family. He was taking inventory. And from that moment on, the storage unit downtown in my mind turned into a defensive plan. I didn't expose Tyler right away. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood something very clearly. Speak too early, and you lose too early. Emma was in love, and when someone is in love, the more you warn them, the more they think you're jealous of control, biased, or trying to ruin their happiness. A guy like Tyler would use that reaction perfectly, turning me into the villain in Emma's eyes. So, I chose a colder, steadier approach. Documentation. I bought a leather notebook and kept it locked in a drawer. From that day on, every time Tyler said something about money, every time he tried to pull Emma away from me, every time Emma changed because of pressure from him, I wrote it down. Date, time, exact words, behavior, no assumptions, no emotions, just facts. Because I knew one thing for certain. Tyler might be able to twist my words, but he couldn't twist a chain of evidence. And when the day came to act, I'd be saying, I have records. After a few months, Tyler changed tactics. He stopped asking me questions directly. He started working on Emma instead. He started whispering to Emma in that concerned husband tone. Why don't you know how much your dad actually has? Why would he hide something that important from you? Marriage means transparency. You shouldn't be financially blind in your own family. It sounded like advice. But in reality, it was poison. And slowly, Emma began to change. She started calling me more often, but her voice wasn't as natural anymore. There was hesitation in it, like she was feeling her way around something. She began asking strange questions, careful, probing ones. Dad, have you set anything aside for me? Do you have a plan for if something ever happens to you? Hearing those questions hurt, not because of the words themselves, but because I realized Tyler had already achieved what he wanted. He had turned my daughter from someone who trusted her father completely into someone who now had to question him. And from that moment on, every time Emma asked something like that, I knew one thing. Those weren't Emma's questions. Those were Tyler's questions, placed carefully into Emma's mouth. And once Tyler saw that Emma had started to doubt me, he moved to the dirtiest step of all, cutting off anyone who might wake her up. That person was Mike. Tyler spoke to Emma in that wounded, protective tone like a husband just trying to look out for his wife. You shouldn't be so close to Mike anymore. He seems a little too interested in your life. Your dad and Mike are tight, so of course he's going to side with your dad. They just want to control you. I'm only worried you might get taken advantage of. It sounded reasonable, even caring, but the real goal was simple: make Mike look suspicious, so Emma would slowly distance herself on her own. A few weeks later, Emma really did start pulling away from Mike. She stopped answering his calls, and when they ran into each other, her responses were short and distant. Mike texted me one night. She looked at me like I was a stranger. Reading that message made my blood run hot, but I still did the same thing I'd been doing all along. I wrote it down in my journal. Tyler. Isolation step. Level 2. Discredit the ally. Because I knew something from experience. Once a manipulator has isolated the victim from family and from friends, the next step usually isn't just words anymore. By this point, I had stopped looking at Tyler through emotion. I started looking at him through patterns of behavior. And when everything lined up, it formed 4 classic patterns, the exact framework manipulators tend to use every time. Isolation. Isolation. He separated Emma from me first, then from Mike. One connection at a time, he cut the ropes until the only person left in her world was him. Financial control. Control of money. He kept digging for information about assets, pushing Emma to question me, planting the idea that husband and wife should know every dollar in this family. Psychological manipulation, twisting perception. He turned me into the secretive father, Mike into the man with suspicious motives, while casting himself as the protective husband. Escalation. Raising the stakes. And when words stop working, men like Tyler always move to the next level: pressure, intimidation, and eventually, action. I wrote one final line in the journal. Tyler has entered the escalation phase. From this point on, if I move too slowly, Emma will be the one who pays for it. 3 years. Not a week. Not a few months. 3 full years of documenting Tyler the way a doctor records the symptoms of a dangerous illness. Every page in that journal was like another needle in a file. The days he asked about money, about the house, about insurance. The days Emma's voice changed when she asked questions that didn't sound like Emma anymore. The days he pulled her away from me, canceling family plans, starting arguments right before she was supposed to come visit. The days he smeared Mike's name, made things up, and played the victim so Emma would feel forced to side with him. I didn't write things like "I feel" or "I think." I wrote the way a courtroom would read it. The exact words, the time, the situation, and Emma's reaction. What started as a thin notebook slowly grew into something thick. And at some point I realized the truth. What I was holding was no longer a journal. It was a case file. A file meant for the day Tyler finally showed his teeth so I wouldn't have to argue. I could just put it on the table and say, "Here, explain this." And then the day I feared most finally arrived. The bruise. Emma came by the house one late afternoon, wearing a long-sleeved shirt even though the weather was hot. She smiled, trying to act normal, but her eyes kept avoiding mine. When she reached for a glass of water, her sleeve slid down for a second, and I saw it, a dark bruise on her wrist, another faint mark higher up on her arm. I asked immediately, my voice low but sharp, "Emma, what happened there?" She flinched, pulling her sleeve down in a reflex that looked almost practiced. Then she answered with something that sounded exactly like a script. "I just slipped on the stairs, Dad. Tyler grabbed me to help me up. So, that's why." I looked straight at my daughter's face. It wasn't the bruise that made my chest go cold. It was the way she answered, too fast, too smooth, too much like a line someone had rehearsed in front of a mirror. I opened my journal and wrote a sentence with a hand that suddenly felt heavy as lead. "Violence has begun. From this point on, Words will not save Emma. That night, I called Mike over. I didn't send a long message. I said exactly one thing. Mike, this is past gut feeling now. Mike came over and took one look at my face. That was enough for him to know this wasn't a small problem. I handed him the journal. I didn't make him read everything. I just flipped to the pages that mattered: the days Tyler isolated Emma, the days he pushed her to question my assets, the entries where he smeared Mike, and finally the line about the bruise. Mike read quietly. His expression changed, but he didn't explode or start shouting. Instead, he spoke slowly. Rick, he's crossed the line. And once a guy like that starts, he doesn't stop. He doesn't stop. I nodded. At that point, I didn't need comfort. I needed someone on my side, with a clear head. So we made 3 decisions right there at the kitchen table. First, no direct confrontation with Tyler until we had solid evidence. Second, start collecting hard proof texts, call records, cameras, financial trails. Third, prepare a plan to get Emma out of Tyler's house the moment a safe opportunity appeared. Mike looked at me and said exactly what I needed to hear. All right. From now on, you're not fighting this alone. That night, Mike and I chose the hardest path. We didn't storm over to Tyler. We didn't call the police right away. Instead, we focused on something more important: pulling Emma back toward the truth. We invited her over with a simple reason. Dad misses you. Come by for dinner. When Emma arrived, I gently locked the door, turned off the TV, and let the room fall quiet like an interview room. Not to scare her, just to make sure she could hear everything clearly. I placed the journal on the table. Emma, I don't want to argue anymore. I just want you to look at the truth. I opened to the pages that mattered. The day Tyler asked about my insurance. The day he pushed her to probe my assets. The day he started bad-mouthing Mike. The day she began pulling away from me. And finally, the entry about the bruise. Emma tried to laugh it off at first, but the more she listened, the paler her face became, because for the first time, all those scattered moments in her mind were lining up, forming a single, unmistakable line. Mike leaned forward and said the one sentence that cut straight through the room. Emma, this isn't love. This is control. Then I looked at my daughter and spoke slowly, word by word. You can be angry with me if you want, but don't be foolish enough to die in that man's hands. After that night, Tyler must have sensed that Emma was starting to waver. And when a manipulator feels control slipping, they move to the fastest lever they know: money. The very next morning, Emma called me. Her voice sounded strange, too soft, too careful, like someone reading from a script that had been coached beforehand. Dad, we've been thinking about settling down for the long term. Could you transfer the house to my name so we can use it as collateral, start a business, build a real home together? I didn't say anything right away, because I could hear Tyler in every single word. Less than an hour later, Tyler called me directly. No more politeness, no more friendly. Rick. His voice came through the phone like an order. Do you know what you're doing? What are you holding on to that house and money for? Emma is my wife. Sooner or later, that property belongs to us. I answered with one sentence, my voice cold as stone. No. And you just proved exactly why you married my daughter. Tyler let out a short, mocking laugh. If you don't cooperate, you're going to regret it. And in that moment, I knew the game had moved past words. That wasn't an argument anymore. That was a threat. Right after that call, I stopped pretending this was something a man could just handle on his own. That kind of pride only gives someone like Tyler more time to strike first. I called a lawyer. That same day, I put the entire journal on the table and set it straight. Right now, I need to protect my daughter, and I need to do it the legal way. We moved fast and did three things immediately. First, we filed for a restraining order based on Tyler's threat and the signs of physical abuse. Second, we tightened security, changed the locks, installed cameras, set up alerts, backed everything up to the cloud. From that point on, Tyler wouldn't be able to hide behind, he said, she said. Third, we hired a private investigator to start tracking Tyler's financial behavior and any unusual moves he might be making. I didn't need Tyler to be afraid of me. I needed him to be afraid of evidence. And I thought that once lawyers and security were involved, he might back off a little. But men like Tyler don't work that way. The more they feel cornered, the more reckless they become. That afternoon, I got a call from Harold Reed, the manager of the storage facility downtown. His voice was tight, urgent. "Mr. Bennett, you need to come down here right now. There's a man causing trouble at Unit 247. Harold said Tyler had shown up with the confidence of someone who thought he was the new owner. He even brought bolt cutters, planning to cut the lock off. When Harold tried to stop him, Tyler snapped back. "This belongs to my wife's family. I have every right to go in there." Harold asked for paperwork. Tyler didn't have any. That's when he started shouting, pounding on the door, making a scene like he could intimidate someone into letting him in. As Harold spoke, a cold feeling spread through my chest. Tyler wasn't hiding anymore. He was trying to break into that unit by force. I told Harold to leave everything exactly as it was, call the police, and I got in the car immediately. Because Unit 247 wasn't just a storage locker. It was the safe that protected Emma, and Tyler had just turned himself into a criminal right in front of a witness. After the Unit 247 incident, I thought maybe Tyler would finally back off. But that same night, Mike called me again. His voice sounded completely different this time, not calm, not measured. It sounded like a man who had just seen something he wasn't supposed to see. "Rick, I've got video." Mike told me Tyler had been tailing him from the parking lot. Mike looped around through a hardware store, then pretended to head into a coffee shop to shake him off. But Tyler didn't back off. Instead, he walked straight into the store and bought a list of things that were way too specific. Rope, a plastic tarp, heavy-duty duct tape, and several bottles of strong cleaning chemicals. Not tools for fixing a house, not supplies for some weekend project. That's the kind of shopping list a man makes when he's planning to erase evidence. Mike said something that made a cold chill run straight down my spine. "Rick, he's not just after the money anymore. He's thinking about making you disappear, so the insurance and the assets come faster." And in that moment, I understood something clearly. From here on out, every move had to be fast, clean, and backed by the police. When I arrived at Unit 247, Harold had kept everything exactly as it was. The lock outside was scratched up, the marks from the bolt cutters still fresh. He came to break in. I unlocked the unit and stepped inside. To anyone else, it would just look like a pile of old boxes and covered furniture. But to me, this place was a vault. I pulled back the tarp that covered the real storage area. Underneath the camouflage sat a locked metal filing cabinet. I opened it and started pulling out the folders one by one. The prenup and legal binding documents were the first thing on top. They made one thing crystal clear. No matter how loud Tyler shouted, he couldn't touch Emma's assets. The trust was in Emma's name. The house, the assets, and any payouts were all routed through a protected structure. Nothing flowing directly through a husband's hands. The insurance policy was the same story. The beneficiary wasn't Tyler. It was the trust, which meant even if he somehow got me killed, he still wouldn't see a dollar. And most important of all, the journal. Along with the file documenting Tyler's behavior, copies of texts, threats, dates, everything. I stood there in the middle of that storage unit, looking at the stack of documents, and one thought hit me clearly. Tyler thought this place was a pile of junk, but in reality, it was a trap that had been quietly prepared for 12 years. He thought he was cornering me. In truth, he was walking straight into the trap himself. After the break-in attempt at Unit 247, things shifted from suspicion to criminal behavior with witnesses. Harold had a statement. The facility cameras had footage. The damaged lock was still there. And I had a journal that documented Tyler's entire pattern of escalation. Step by step. The more desperate Tyler became, the more he exposed himself. He started sending Emma texts full of pressure, calling me with threats, and then turning around to play the victim in front of other people. What he didn't understand was simple. The more he performed, the more evidence he left behind. Mike turned in the video of Tyler buying those cleanup supplies. My lawyer gathered everything. The journal, the messages, the threats, the storage facility footage, into one solid case file, and the police began watching him, officially. By that point, Tyler no longer had a path to dig for gold. The only thing left for him was to show his fangs. And in the end, those fangs would be the very thing that bit him back. He looked down on that storage unit, and because he underestimated it, he walked straight into the one place that had everything needed to take him down legally. After Tyler turned the Unit 247 incident into a clear criminal act, the rest was just a matter of assembling the file and pressing the button. The police had the facility cameras, Harold's eyewitness statement, the damaged lock and the marks from the bolt cutters, the chain of threatening messages Tyler sent to both me and Emma. Mike submitted the video of Tyler buying those cleanup supplies, and then I placed the one thing Tyler would hate the most on the table, the journal. Not a story, not accusations. A straight timeline of escalation, dates, words, actions. A pattern that no clever excuse could untangle. By then, the picture was complete. Tyler thought he was hunting for money, but what he had really done was build the case against himself, piece by piece. When Tyler was finally brought in, he still tried to perform. I was only protecting my wife. This old man has always hated me. But in court, nobody cared about his feelings or his little act. They cared about evidence, and the evidence did exactly what it was supposed to do. In the end, Tyler was arrested and charged with multiple offenses tied to the break-in, threats, fraud, and conspiracy to take property he had no right to touch. The trial ended with a heavy sentence, 15 years in prison. And for the first time in 3 years, I saw Emma breathe like a free person again. But after the trial, life didn't magically wrap itself up the way it does in movies. Emma couldn't just walk out of a filthy marriage and wake up the next morning smiling like she had never been crushed. She had to go to therapy. She had to learn how to trust people again. She had to relearn how to say no without feeling guilty for it. And a legal system that had cut Tyler completely out of her life. As for me, I walked away from it all with a lesson carved deep into my bones. Manipulators almost always follow the same path. Isolate, control the money, twist perception, escalate. If you see the signs at step 1 and stay silent, you'll end up paying the price at step 4. Trying to keep the peace with someone rotten doesn't protect you. It turns you into prey. Tyler thought that storage unit downtown was just junk. But in the end, it was the very thing that saved Emma, because documents and evidence don't care who you are.